Let me first say I fully expect in a couple minutes when we see the numbers for and against the motion that I'm against the motion. I expect most of you are against the motion. When we vote at the end, I know a lot of you, if it's really skewed on the side of being against the motion, are going to want to give these guys a couple votes. It's kind of like wanting to vote for Huckabee right now. He's still in the game, and there's stylishness, and you kind of want to give him a little something for being in the game and taking the side. But we all know we can't get there. And that's where I am. Look, Michael Mandelbaum made very clear that there are only two ways you can agree with me. Number one, you have to believe that the world doesn't need a global policeman. Or number two, that there is a better system out there than having a global policeman. That's spoken like a true academic. I agree with both of those things. I think the world does need a global policeman. I think it would be the best system if the U.S. was the global policeman. But I also think we are incapable and unprepared to do it. So I'm trying to be a realist. I'm trying to look at what we can actually do, the limitations of our power. Look, I need a loving family, but my mom and dad died of cancer. I'm sorry. I'm not going to get there. That's kind of, it's true, but I'm not looking for sympathy. My point is or laughter, but we're not going to get there. And that's really the crux of my argument. Now, let me make a couple of points here. The first is I fully agree with the notion that the world desperately needs leadership. We are in a situation where global architecture is not catching up to the radical change in geopolitical shift. The United States doesn't have the lifting power it used to. China's growing like crazy. Energy is increasingly coming from unstable parts of the world. NATO's ineffectual. The Security Council's ineffectual. The proliferation regime is broken. Don't even get me started on climate change. Lord knows you need a leader to take advantage of this and to move the system in a direction that we will all be able to live more secure, more prosperous lives. I do believe the United States needs to fill as much of that void as possible. The United States needs to be a global leader. Condi Rice said as much at Davos a couple weeks ago. The Russians strongly disagreed. They said the world does not need a conductor for the orchestra. And then Shimon Peres, the closest to Henry Kissinger on the panel, said what we really need is a composer, not a leader. I think the world does need a leader. I think a policeman is a very different fact on the ground. Look, when we talk about a policeman, I think about enforcement. I think about Max boots on the ground. I don't think we have the political will in this country. I don't think we have the political capital in this country. And I think trying to argue that we do risks a growth of anti-Americanism abroad. But more importantly and more dangerously, it risks a rise of protectionism in the United States. It risks a rise of neo-isolationism in the United States. Look at the Pew polls. Look at how Americans increasingly feel about support for free trade. Look at how they increasingly feel about whether or not they believe America is benefited from the way the world system is evolving. They don't. Part of the reason they don't, I suspect, is because folks in the Ninth Ward in New Orleans don't feel like they're doing as well as they should. And they don't necessarily like the idea of giving billions of dollars in aid after a tsunami in Indonesia when we can't build our own homes in New Orleans. I am not suggesting we shouldn't be giving the billions of dollars in aid. I firmly believe we should. But I think that taking on the role of global policeman creates far more sentiment in the United States in opposing the world of good the United States does and should continue to do. Let me be specific on a couple of issues. Iran. The United States desperately needs to help reduce the threat of Iran. How might we do that? Effective sanctions? Look at who provides refined product to Iran from around the world. It's not the United States. It's the Europeans. It's the Indians. You want to be a global policeman on Iran? You better get their support. How about shutting down their accounts, the accounts of the Quds Force, or of the Revolutionary Guard? Better get support from Dubai. It's not the United States. The U.S. in a globalized world can't act as a global policeman with one of the most important conflicts facing us today. Lord knows they'd like to try, but unless you're arguing that this is going to be the next American military intervention, and there doesn't seem to be much direct support for that even among the most ardent neoconservatives in the United States, you've got a serious problem. How about a place where we can't even argue about military support? How about North Korea? The United States said, if the North Koreans develop a nuclear weapon, we are going to be very, very angry. And the North Koreans tested a nuclear weapon. And you know what? The anger in Washington was palpable. But we didn't do anything. And we went back to the Chinese, and the Chinese said, we told you you don't have a military option. Sanctions aren't going to work. Now let's sit down at the table and work with them. The United States said, yeah, you're right. Okay, we'll sit down and we'll talk to you. At the end of the day, I'd love to be in a position where the Americans could be the global policeman on Iran and North Korea. It would be a better system. It would be a safer system. But we can't do it. And the more we try to do it by ourselves in that role, the more incapable we're going to be. Okay, 2 final points since I only have a minute. First point is, what I like in terms of leadership is what Bob Zoellick did vis-a-vis the Chinese, was talk about stakeholdership. Now, the Chinese originally didn't know how to translate that word, but once they did, they kind of figured it out. We need more responsibility from the actors that are becoming vastly more powerful every day, every year, vis-a-vis the United States. We're increasingly going to be unable to be in favor of this motion. In 4 years, in 8 years, in 12 years, we better prepare for it by getting more stakeholdership, leadership, and dare I say global policemanship from the folks around the world that can increasingly take some of that lifting regionally. Final point, indispensable nation. Madeleine Albright came up with that term, actually originally from James Chase, one of my mentors. I fully admit the United States is an indispensable nation. But you know what? If you're the indispensable part of a family, if you're the husband, if you're the father, you do not go out and buy a house you can't afford with a mortgage you can't service. What you do is you actually get your apartment, you bring home the bacon, you keep your nose down, and you ensure that you are there in a sustainable way. We need to recognize that we have to eat within our means. We've had a serious problem with that in the American economy. I fear we have a serious problem with that in terms of global security, and I truly hope as a consequence you'll vote with us against the motion. Thank you very much.